I am currently the president of the National PSM Association. I started out, though, just like you, as a PSM program coordinator, and I eventually grew up to be president.
All right, so it's 3 o'clock now, so we can get started with the Ask NPSMA. I am Deborah Silver, your host. And today we're going to be talking about the NPSMA's new PSM program affiliation process. So for those of you on the line, some of you are on video, some of you muted, turned off your video, some of you are on voice. But if you're not talking, if you just mute yourself, and if you have a question, you can unmute and ask a question. And you can also ask a question through the chat if you want. But I'm going to pass it off to Tim, the NPSMA President, and to Linda, the NPSMA VP of Publications. So take it away, Tim.
Okay, thank you, Deborah, and welcome to everybody who's on the call with us. It looks like we have 14 participants already, and I wouldn't be surprised if a few more show up along the way. As you can see, what we want to talk a little bit about today is the new program affiliation process. And I will be leading things off as the NPSMA President, and I will at times pass things off to Linda Strausbaugh, who is our VP for Publications, who has a tremendously long and deep history with PSM and has a tremendous amount of knowledge and was sort of one of the driving forces behind this new affiliation process. If you have questions, feel free to put something in the chat box and we will take a look at it. We will also stop at various times to allow people to ask questions as well. So if you do have a question, we will give you time for that to be answered. So what I will do then is start with the very next slide. And Jeannie, are you the one who controls the slides for me? Perfect. Okay. So I just want to first give a little bit of background and context of how we got here. So for a number of years, the PSM movement had really two bodies that were in charge of it. We had the National PSM Association, or NPSMA, which was a membership organization. And then we had the Commission on Affiliation of PSM Programs, sometimes known as the PSM National Office, and they were the group that really collected the data, and they did all the affiliation and reaffiliation and sort of the making sure that all the programs met the ideals of the PSM degree, and that office was housed at the Keck Graduate School. Then in April, Jim Sterling, who was in charge of the PSM National Office, called Scott Herness, who was at that time the president of NPSMA, to say that the commission was going to be closed at the Keck Graduate Institute as of June and would be no more. Scott called together the executive committee of the NPSMA Board of Directors and told us, and we sat there in stunned silence for a few seconds, until somebody, and I unfortunately forget who it was, said, you know, this might actually be an opportunity for us. And that kind of broke the stunned silence, and we began to talk about how this could actually be a real benefit for us. As part of the closing of the PSM National Office, the NPSMA decided that they would take on the duties that the commission previously had been in charge of, and two of the biggest ones are membership and affiliation and reaffiliation. And so we sort of began to take that stuff over in June, and we've been spending the last 6 or 7 months preparing to roll things out at the start of 2020. It is now the start of 2020, so things are being rolled out. So if you would go to the next slide for me, Jeannie. I want to talk a little bit about why we decided this was an opportunity for us. First of all, it was always my experience when we had the two groups, the NPSMA and the commission, that I was confused about who did what, who I had to do one thing for, what the roles of each of them were. Now that we are reduced to a single organization, the NPSMA, that confusion should be gone. Everything will end up being taken care of or run through the National PSM Association, both membership and affiliation, the data and quality control. So we should have less confusion. It also makes it easier for us to switch directions, as that may be necessary based upon trends in graduate education. And it also will allow us to make decisions more quickly because we now only have one body that we have to consult with and not two. It's also nice to have just a single voice for the PSM movement, less worrying about trying to coordinate things amongst a larger group of people, and more deciding how it is that we want to go forward and then moving forward with that single voice. In the past, the NPSMA was dependent upon the committee for our finances, and so it was the commission that would contact programs, get them to put in their or to pay their dues, and then the commission would send the NPSMA a portion of that funding. So we were completely dependent upon the commission, or maybe 90% dependent upon the commission for our finances. Now we are in control of that, and a number of you know that because we have sent you invoices within the last week or so. And so now that we have that control, it'll allow us to have a somewhat more stable and predictable financial model. One of the first things we realized was that by reducing ourselves to a single association and looking at what our costs were, we realized that we could actually pass on some savings to our NPSMA members, and we'll talk about this at the very last slide about how the costs for being a PSM program have changed and how in basically every case they will have dropped. And then the other thing that we really wanted to work on was to streamline and make more efficient this affiliation and reaffiliation process. I have been through that process when it was run by the commission, reaffiliation of 3 programs and affiliation of a 4th program. I know it wasn't easy. I know it took a lot of time, and it seemed sometimes like we were asking for things that were less than necessary. And so the new process, we think we have pretty much ironed out those things, and it should be faster and it should be easier for all of our programs. So if you would mind going to the next slide, Jeannie. And while she does that, I'm going to pause just a second to see if anybody has any questions they want to ask before we move into talking about the PSM reaffiliation application itself. I'm going to sit here for 10 seconds, and if I don't hear anything, I will move on. All right, so that was 10 seconds of silence. So what I want to do is go through what the PSM affiliation or reaffiliation application looks like today. The reaffiliation and the affiliation applications are almost identical. There are a couple of places where we ask for information on the number of current students or the number of graduates, and that's obviously going to be more for those programs that are reaffiliating rather than for those programs that are affiliating for the first time. I am going to talk about the very first step. I will then transfer it over to Linda, who will talk about parts 2, 3, 4, and 5, and then I will pick it back up again for parts 6 and 7. So in the next slide, you'll see the very first thing that we start to ask for is just some basic information about your program. So the things that we want to know, if you can move that forward one more for me, Jeannie. There we go, oops. So we want to know simple things. What's your university? What's your program? Who's your program director? And how can we contact this person? And then if you have a secondary program contact you would like to have us know about, you can put that person's information as well. And then we want to know things like when the degree was approved and what your web address is. And we want the web address in particular because we're going to want to put you on our PSM program locator website and make sure that interested students can get direct access to your program to learn more about it. We're also going to ask the very basic question about what does your program look like? Is it fully in person? Is it fully online or somewhere in between? And we really want to collect that information because we know that we need to provide different benefits to different members depending upon what sorts of programs they are offering and how they are delivering those programs. And so As things move towards a more online situation, the NPSMA will have to adapt to that, so we need to have that data. And then if you're reaffiliating, we're going to be interested in things such as how many students have graduated and how many students are currently enrolled. So the very first part is just some very basic information about the program itself. And so after that, we move on to more of the main parts of the application. And I'm going to turn this over to Linda Strausbaugh to talk about.
Thank you, Tim. Just to give you a little bit of information about myself, I was the founding director of the Applied Genomics program at the University of Connecticut. And I would use this opportunity to say hello to Elaine Merkin, who was an essential part of the success of those programs. I've been involved with the NPSMA since 2014, 3 years as its Director for Strategic Initiatives, and for the past few years running as the Vice President for Publications and responsible there for the Innovator, the PSM News, and the Chronicle. So one of the things that we were interested in was to make sure that the PSM was on the radar screen of nationally recognized groups. And we were aware that over the past 2 years, in 2017 and in 2018, there were national guidelines that provided the framework for what we can think of as an ideal master's degree. And as we began looking at these guidelines, and also I would note that as part of our efforts to make sure the PSM was considered in this national framework, we were invited to make presentations at the first committee meeting of the National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine Consensus Study, Graduate STEM Education for the 21st Century. And your slides have a link to that if you haven't looked at it. Chapter 4 is on the master's degree, and that chapter informed a lot of what I will say with coming forward. So again, our interest and what we realized very early on was that the PSM already met virtually all of the recommended criteria for an ideal master's degree. And this was part of what had us thinking that this was an opportune time for us to incorporate those into our own criteria. And again, I think what we recognize is that by aligning the PSM with the National Core Competency Recommendations, we would immediately have increased credibility at our own academic institutions. I think that every university recognizes the Council of Graduate Schools and the National Academies as the premier national groups. On the next slide, we can see the one of the first of the core elements that's described. And the way the slides are presented, on the left hand is the core element, and then we have in gold what the national studies recommend, and then on the right hand side we have the way that we implement these. So as far as STEM content is concerned, the recommendation is that graduates should develop core disciplinary knowledge and an ability to work between disciplines. So in our application, this is really simple. We're simply asking, are the majority of your program courses from STEM disciplines? Yes, no. And although you're seeing a form in this slide presentation, what you need to know is that when you actually fill out the application, this is an online continuous flow checkbox and fill in the blanks. And so we're simply asking, are the majority of your programs from STEM disciplines? And then we're asking you to provide the STEM field that your program covers. And this is because we want to make the website listing, the program locator that Tim referred to earlier, we want to make that as up to date as we possibly can. And also, students often look for clusters by disciplines. So this allows a student to go into the program locator, to pick a field, and to see all of the programs in that STEM field. This also allows us at NPSMA to send you targeted emails by discipline. So for example, we sometimes become aware of funding opportunities or conference presentation opportunities for particular fields or national meetings, and this allows us then to share that information with you directly. These left-hand side responses are required. The right-hand side response on interdisciplinary courses or curriculum from multiple departments or schools, this is an optional response that's for informational purposes only. It's not part of the evaluation process, but this is something that both CGS and NASM include as important things to know about. So that's the core element on the STEM information. In the next slide, we can see the second core element that we're going to talk about, which are professional competencies. Now, before I go forward, let me just explain that the NASM recommendations takes the elements that would have been in the plus world in PSM and break that into two separate categories. Professional competencies, which are specific to a career discipline or a professional pathway, and transferable skills, which are not field specific. So in our application, we have partitioned what were previously collected under the notion of a plus component of a PSM, and we have put those into these two categories. So under the professional competencies, the recommendation is that students should explore career options and develop abilities defined by a given profession. In the PSM world, we accomplish this with an external employer advisory board. And we have provided an opportunity where you may upload a list of your board members with their organizational affiliations, and on the online form, you just click a button and can upload a document. We also have a listing which asks you to indicate which of the following are included as objectives or program learning objectives in your program. And we're requiring a fairly low bar at this. We're requiring at least one of the following areas, and you can select all that apply. Again, these were areas that when we were talking with the group that was designing the new application process were things that would pertain to some career trajectories, but not to others. And we've left an opportunity for you to add other. So again, the things we're showing you on the left-hand side of this screen are required elements. On the right hand, we have an optional element to indicate whether there's certificates or micro-credentials or licenses that are also part of your program. Again, this right-hand optional response is another area that was designated by the NASM as important information and important aspects of these kinds of elements. So the next slide addresses the next core element, which are transferable and foundational skills. And in the guidelines, the national groups indicate that students should develop skills that transcend disciplines and are widely applicable. And again, these were things that would be in the plus world of PSM. And so we again have a very reasonable and low bar that you need to have some kind of course objectives or learning objectives in at least one of these following areas. And again, these were the areas that we felt were ones that were applicable to any STEM field and applicable to any career destination. This is a mandatory element. When you go on the online application form, the mandatory elements have a red asterisk so you know easily which ones are required and which ones aren't. So the professional competencies and the translational and transferable skills and the STEM content are three areas that the PSM has been doing since its inception 20 years ago. The next slide addresses what may be a relatively new consideration for PSM programs. So before I go into this, let me just say that in the new application, this Part 5 will be titled Research and Work-Based Learning. So we're recognizing that. That was a suggestion from our National Workforce Advisory Council. And in thinking about master's degrees, one of the things when this new definition or expanded definition of research in the master's context came out, it became clear to many of us that, in fact, PSM programs were doing this. Although we didn't necessarily call them research elements, I think almost all PSM programs have something along this ilk. And so as we were developing this and as we were thinking about how we should promote the PSM degree to national leaders, to our own university leaders, faculty, we thought that it was important to be mindful that a non-thesis degree is not the same as a non-research degree. And in fact, this expanded definition of research includes things such as an ability to apply the scientific method, to apply statistical analysis, to gain experience in conducting research or field studies, or to engage in work-based learning and research in a mentored setting. And in fact, in thinking about all of the programs that I was aware of and the many students whom I read about what they had done, it seemed to me that virtually all of our programs already do this. And so this is the new way we're thinking about research activities or research training in the PSM world. And we just want you to list at least one of the following research elements that must be a part of your program. And you'll recognize this list as things that many of you already do: internships, co-ops, capstone projects. In addition, many PSM students have the opportunity to conduct independent study or research projects in a traditional academic environment. And many of, although our programs may not require a thesis, almost all require a final report. So these are the way we're thinking about it. So what I'd like to do is just take a moment to just kind of make some overall comments about these core elements. And then I'll follow Tim's lead and have a few moments for any questions you may have. So one of the things I want to emphasize about all of these elements in the new application is that as we think about this, we're allowing and relying on university quality programs. I'm sorry, university and institutional ways of maintaining quality in their programs. So you may, those of you who had affiliated or reaffiliated under the old regulations, may remember that you had to upload extensive documents about your courses. You had to try to partition your courses into what percentage of it was disciplinary content, what or skills content, and all of those sorts of things. In fact, we've decided that that is really not the role of our body, and nor do we want it to be the role, because we recognize that it's very difficult to sometimes partition courses into different areas of content. And when I was a program director, for me, that was an enormous sort of barrier to becoming affiliated through the old program, because it takes an enormous amount of work to gather all those course descriptions and to partition them into various ways. So in making this new application process, which we think is going to be much easier, we've elected to not require you to put in all of those things. Your departments, your graduate schools, your colleges, your universities already have mechanisms for approving courses and content and all of that. So all we're looking for now from our programs is that they meet these requirements to be recognized as a professional science master's. So with that, I'll conclude the discussion of the core elements recommended in the NASEM report and founded on the College of Graduate Schools report. and open it to any questions. And if there are none, or after the questions, Tim will pick up to tell you a little bit more about some new elements that we've added.
Well, we appear to have a quiet bunch. So again, feel free to ask questions in the chat box if you want to, and Linda and I will pick them up when we can, or else we'll have more opportunity for questions at the very end. So the next part of the application is it's really directed at the PSM being.
Sorry, we have a question.
Absolutely, go ahead.
We don't have a specific project. We have in that subject, they will develop a project.
Ya, pero es un capstone.
Ajá. No, por eso, pero no tenemos como capstone, nos aparece como asignatura. Que es explicarle que el proyecto capstone está, pero nosotros no lo tenemos explicado, sino que lo pondremos por la asignatura.
Okay. Hello, team. So I'm Wilfredo, who probably wrote you an email. Probably was you who answered. I'm here with people from the grad school at the University of Francisco Gaviria from El Salvador. The only observation we have so far is that our capstone project, its name, it is like a research project, but it is the class name. It is the capstone is a class itself. So would it be a problem with that, or that's our question basically?
No, I don't think there's any problem with that at all.
Yeah, I would agree. Capstone projects are an accepted aspect of the PSM program.
In our planning, we don't have a capstone project like this, but we have a subject. In this subject, they will develop it. They will do the capstone project.
Okay.
No problem. No problem.
It probably. I mean, we will have to obviously review the application as we will with all of them. But as long as your students are getting some sort of experiential learning, especially if it has a tie to the industry or something outside of the university in particular, that's a wonderful way to address that. We really want to have these students be prepared to step into the workforce and be productive right away, which means they have to have a little bit of practical hands-on experience.
And if I can respond to the question in the chat for those of you who may not have a video right now, the question is any document or evidence required for the core elements or just responding to the form, or is there more limited documentation of those requirements? As we currently have it now, we are simply asking you to indicate that you include those elements in your program. As Tim will talk a little bit later, we are asking for some verification in the forms of a letter that you've committed to the elements of this request. So what I would say to you also is that I'm not convinced that the documentation that was required previously really did any more to meet these requirements other than program directors saying so. Because particularly for the professional competencies and the transferable skills, if a program does not have a course with that title, as our colleagues indicated on their capstone project, if there isn't a title that says that, then we were always relying on good faith of the program directors to describe their courses correctly. And so it was our feeling that since it really is a good faith effort from the beginning, we weren't convinced that requiring people to upload a large amount of information would in any way improve the quality of that process. So does that answer the question that was asked? Thank you.
Yeah, so we're good with that. We were working previously to get this affiliation, and this is a new master's program that we're working on from scratch, if we can say that, and we are basing this this program on our experience on a PSM at New Jersey, Rutgers, and we're trying to translate that same structured and insight from that course and the way it is designed to this new master's program that we're going to offer here. So that's the reason why we defined it a course named like Capstone to fulfill that requirement. But it makes sense for me what you're saying, that it doesn't guarantee that it will help having it or not, but as long as we fulfill the requirement the team and you were expressing before. So we're okay with that. Thank you.
Yes, and Rutgers is one of our better reputable PSM programs, and I only say that because the program coordinator is on the phone call right now. So it's one of our bigger and better PSM programs, and so if you build yours in El Salvador based upon that model, we will be very pleased. So
I'll send that check to you afterwards, Tim. So.
All right. Again, there will be more time for questions at the end, but let me continue on then. So one of the things that we really want out of the PSM community is a community of involved PSM coordinators and PSM interested individuals. And so what we're asking is that you agree to commit to participation in a minimum of one activity over 3 years. This is like a really, really minimal bar, but in a 3-year period, we want you to have some involvement in the community. And it could be as simple as participating in an Ask NPSMA call like you are right now. It could be being a committee member, attending the NPSMA conference or workshop, being involved in some of the other things that we sponsor throughout the years. But this is what we want. We want you to actually be part of this community, because the more people we have involved, the better the PSM programs and the NPSMA as an association is going to be. And so it's a relatively low bar. We really want to get people involved in things. I can say from personal experience, I have enjoyed, excuse me, the PSM and the NPSMA much more once I became involved than when I was just sitting on the sidelines. And I think most of us who are involved in it will say the same sort of thing. So we do want some program leadership, development, and engagement along the way. And then the last part of the application, which Linda had alluded to earlier, and if Jeannie, if you could move us forward one more, is a letter of support. So as Linda mentioned, the previous process involved a lot of documentation, and I have a confession to make. When I was coordinating the 3 PSM programs at Grand Valley, I was told that we had to reaffiliate in 2014, and we had a deadline of I think it was April of 2015. And I missed that deadline because I looked at the amount of work I had to do, and I just couldn't get myself started, and I had to ask for a 1-year extension. We don't want that to happen with the new affiliation process. So a lot of the documentation that we have removed from this process comes in part 7 in the letter of support. And what we want is a statement signed by the program director and a dean or a department head that says your institution is accredited and is in good standing, and you are committed to the goals and the educational elements of the PSM program. And we will let your internal quality control and quality assessment and all those other things handle the fact that you are actually doing what you claimed you were going to do in a program. And we will trust that your university or your college is going to be the one that will make sure that you are hitting those ideals. And that's just a file that you can put together a letter, get it signed, and then upload it as the last part of your application. And so those are, in total, the elements of the new application process. that application is currently available, but it's only available by request. It's not available publicly for everybody right now. So if you are a program that feels you are ready to go through this process, you can contact me, you can contact Linda, or you can contact the national office, Jeannie Houts, and we will make sure to give you access to that link to be able to fill out the application. So at this point, I am again going to pause for questions. You can use the group chat, and as you can see, Deborah has already put in there that she is more than happy to talk to people about what their program structure looks like. And you can also, if you would like to, ask us on audio, and Linda and I will do our best to answer. So the question from Heather is whether the goal of the statement in part 7 is that to say that you're going to follow all the parts of the affiliation. That is the internship, the mostly STEM classes, etc. And yeah, that's exactly it. We're not going to go through and police to make sure that you have more than 50% STEM coursework, or we're not going to double check to make sure that your students are actually doing the internships. We're going to require on your internal assessments to be able to do that. If you put together a program proposal that is approved by your university that says you are going to do things, then we expect your university to make sure that you're doing that. Any other questions?
Yeah, we have another question. Is regarding with the new documentation, where since it's not available on the website, how can we get it? Will you mail that to us, or? So
if you send an email to myself or to Linda Strausbaugh or to Jeannie Houts, and she's the coordinator at npsma.org, if you send us an email requesting that, we will send it to you.
All right, thank you. We'll see if there is any other question.
All right. I see Jeannie is putting my email address in there so that I get everything. So another question is, when do you anticipate this will be available? It is already available. We have sent it out to 2 or 3 programs. So as soon as you would like it, you can contact us.
And I would add that if you're a new program and you think you would like some extra information on some of the elements, we have other documents that we can share with you that talk about the transferable or foundational skills, that talk about employer advisory boards, that talk about how you understand the new criteria, and the slide set that we're using today. So if you write to Tim or to me or to Jeannie, and I believe our email addresses are also on the first slide, which I think most of you got the slide set. But if you email either or any of us and let us know if you would want to receive some additional information, we would be happy to send those directly to you as well.
And as a follow-up to one of the previous questions was, when will this be available online, not via email? And basically, we are going through this for the first time or two right now. We want to have a couple under our belt and make sure that the application process is working. And at that point, we will start to put it online for everybody. But we don't want to put online something that has a few things that are wrong with it that we haven't heard about yet. Seema, you had a question to ask, I think?
Tim, if I could just add one more thing. So we should clarify that the application is online. The only thing we'll be sending you by email is the link to let you access the correct form. So it already is online. It's not, that you have to print something out and fill it in manually. The only email step in this is for us to send you the access to the correct form. So it is already online.
And then Seema, did you have a question you wanted to ask?
Well, one is a comment. This is so fabulous. Thank you so much. We have 5 programs that are currently in my college that we have submitted affiliations for, and they were so arduous. So I'm so grateful for this simple form that you have, put in place. Thank you. I applaud you. I truly, all of Temple thanks you. So that's my comment. Question for you. So every year we used to get these, again, very, very detailed assessment forms about our program. We didn't receive any this past summer, so I'm assuming that's because of the transition that happened. Will something like that also be simplified, or will you not do assessments anymore? And then also, I just want you to know that we are also bringing on 2 new programs. So we will be reaching out to you for the affiliation. So those are my 3 comments.
Excellent. So we look forward to seeing the 2 new programs. And in one more slide, we're going to give you some even better news as far as the costs for things go. The question about the other assessments that came out, those were things that the commission was responsible for and would send surveys out to programs to gather data. We would like to do that as well, but at this moment, we are not in a position where we can do that. We're trying to take over the affiliation and membership process, and it's going to take us a period of time to get that sort of under our belt and smoothed out and as automated as possible. And once we have that down, then we'll move towards the data gathering step again. So my guess is that you will not get a request in 2020 for data. Hopefully by 2021, we'll be ready to go out and do that again. A couple of questions here are about our review and decision-making process and timeline. And so once that application has been submitted, it will go to an affiliation committee, and that affiliation committee currently has 7 members. 1 member is from the NPSMA Board of Directors, and the other 6 are non-board members, and that was done on purpose to keep the board out of that decision-making process as much as possible. That application will be then sent out or assigned to 3 of those affiliation committee members who will review it, and from that make a decision on whether or not it qualifies as a PSM program. If it's obvious that it does, they will let the chair of that committee, the board member, know that this particular program qualifies as a PSM and it should be affiliated. If it's unclear or if it doesn't seem to fit within that process, they will then either directly or through the board chair contact that program for additional information or just to have a conversation about what it is that, why it is that they think this is a PSM program and maybe some suggestions for changes that could be made to bring it in line with our PSM ideals. Our goal is to have a turnaround time of about 6 weeks at the most for our affiliation applications. As you know now, it's a relatively short application, and so it's merely making sure that our committee members have a chance to read through it and get together and make a decision. So we try to make this as short as possible, and if necessary, we will do back and forth with the programs who have submitted. All right, I think that is all the questions. Let's see. I think that was all the questions, and now we've got one more sort of question or comment, which is not about the affiliation process, but what is NPSMA doing to promote the PSM so that more people know what it is? That's a great question, Heather. And as president of the NPSMA, I am supposed to have the answer to that. So we have a few things that we are working on, but really one of my priorities for this year is to come up with a marketing plan where we can do exactly that. We're trying to do a little more on the social media side of things. In January, I submitted a proposal to the CGS for their New Deans Conference to be able to present the PSM there. And our former president, Scott Herness, had been at a CGS conference in December where he had sort of talked that up, and it seemed to get some good response. So I'm hopeful we'll be able to present there as well. I am going to let Linda maybe comment a little bit about what she has been doing with CGS.
Thank you, Tim. So you should know that the NPSMA has a partnership with the Council of Graduate Schools, And if it's okay with you, Deborah, I'll talk a little bit about that. And I can allow you certainly to elaborate. So we have a collaborative grant funded by the National Science Foundation in partnership with the Council of Graduate Schools to conduct a study on individual development plans in STEM masters. And in doing that grant, which was, we just learned that it was approved and funded last week, so this is hot off the presses. In doing that, we partnered with some of the leading people at Council of Graduate Schools. They're actively involved with us. They've been very supportive of the PSM, and that's a partnership that we're happy to reinforce. We also remain in regular contact with the National Academies of Science and Engineering and Medicine. Both Tim and I are in contact with folks there who have been very supportive of the master's degree. And again, to have an entire chapter on the master's included in a report on the future of graduate education is a rather unique occurrence for those of us who've been in this graduate education world for a while. We know that most of those studies end up focusing very strongly on the PhD. That probably was still the case in this one. But the fact that they requested master's and especially PSM input from the beginning and incorporated it in an entire chapter is really quite remarkable in terms of getting on the radar screen. And in fact, in chapter 4 of that NASM study, they actually reference the professional science masters, and there are several paragraphs about the program. So those of you who are always looking for kind of independent confirmation of the value of the PSM should take a look at that chapter and lean heavily on it. Just to give you a heads up, the NSF grant that we have has 2 parts. One is a survey of master's programs, and this will not be confined to PSM degree programs, but to STEM masters more widely writ. And that survey will come from the Council of Graduate Schools, so you should all be on the lookout for that. We'll be asking each program, each STEM master's program, to complete a very short survey. It should not take longer than 10 or 15 minutes. And the second part of our project is that the NSF will sponsor the pre-conference workshop at next year's annual events. That will be on November the 4th in Tampa, Florida. So we would encourage you to be on the lookout for that. In addition, in the PSM newsletter, and if you don't receive those newsletters, please let Jeannie know or me know as soon as possible. We'll make sure you get on that mailing list. But on the next newsletter and in some other emails you'll be receiving, you'll have an opportunity to add your name to an indication of interest list for both the survey and the workshop. At this point, we have funds to pay for the room and the meals for about 50 participants. There will not be a registration fee for the workshop as we're currently thinking about it, but this is all very new from last week. So I think that a lot of these efforts to improve the visibility of the PSM are beginning to pay off.
Okay, I don't see any other questions at the moment. So I would like to finish with the final slide, which is in many ways the most exciting of the slides. One of the things as we looked at the budget for NPSMA, the number of PSM programs that were out there, and what we needed to be able to make our budget, it kind of became apparent that we could modify the cost structure. And so what this slide outlines is what the cost was under the old setup with membership with the NPSMA and affiliation with the commission versus membership and affiliation under just the NPSMA and the new model. And in the top part, we have a situation where you're putting together a brand new PSM program and you'll be the first one at your university. Under the old model, it would cost you $1,000 to have that program considered by the commission for affiliation. And so you would have to send in your application and a check for $1,000, and then they would look at it. And then assuming that you were approved and your program was relatively small, so less than 10 student FTE, every year you would be charged $500 for affiliation and $500 for an NPSMA membership, which over 5 years then comes to a cost of $6,000. If your program was a little bit larger, about 10 to 49 FTE, that NPSMA membership cost would be $1,000. And had it gone up to greater than 49 FTE, 50 or more, that membership cost would have been $2,000 a year. So your 5-year cost would have been $6,000 or more. Under the new model, there is no cost for having your program reviewed for affiliation. Once you are approved, each program costs $500 per year. And so over 5 years, that would be $2,500, a substantial savings for a university that is considering a new PSM program that would be the first PSM program at the university. In the bottom half of that slide is the case where you already have existing PSM programs. And I'm using Grand Valley State University's situation because that's where I'm at, where we have 4 total programs. So under the old model, we were charged over a 5-year period, $2,000 for affiliation. That's $500 for each of our program, plus another $500 for NPSMA membership. And this was only if our programs were relatively small and our total FTE was less than 10. And so that would be $2,500 total per year. So for a 5-year cost, that would be $12,500. If our programs were a little bit larger, 10 to 49 FTE, that total cost over 5 years would go up to $15,000. And because we actually have more than 50 FTE, our total cost for those 5 years was going to be roughly $20,000 for our 4 programs. Now, under the new situation, it costs us $500 per program each year. That's $2,000 times the 5 years is $10,000. So that costs us less under the new situation than it did under the old. In addition, if we decide we want to add a 5th program to our set of PSM programs, our cost stays at $2,000. That's the maximum that we will charge a university for a PSM program. So if I take Rutgers as an example, Deborah has, I believe, somewhere around 25 PSM programs. She pays $2,000 a year for those 25 PSM programs now versus what she would have to pay previously, which was a number that was well larger than my total PSM budget, and I'm sure the PSM budgets and many others. So we've taken a look at sort of what it's going to cost us as an association to be able to exist and survive and provide benefits, and have found out what we think it will cost the PSM programs to be able to support us in that way. And it turns out there should be a significant cost savings now. So with that, I will stop and ask if there are any other questions. I see there was a question about, under the new model, will NPSMA keep extending a diploma to new graduates besides the one that the university is offering to the PSM program, and does that apply to international programs? And the answer is that yes. Once you have a program that is approved and you have a graduate, you can request a certificate from the NPSMA, and Deborah and a few others are working on putting together digital badges that your students can now have access to and post on their LinkedIn profile or similar things. And are there other questions to do either with affiliation or with the new cost structure? All right, I'm not seeing any more. So if there are questions that come up later and you want to know what the answer is, I have an open door policy, so please fly up to Grand Rapids, Michigan, take a taxi downtown, and you can find me in my office. If not, you can always send me an email. I always tell my students that they need to respond to emails within 24 hours to be professional. So I try to hold myself to that same standard as well. And Linda and Jeannie are also great people to contact with questions like that. I do see one more came in, and it says, will we get an invoice when we need to go through the new affiliation process? When you need to go through the affiliation process, you will get a notice that it is time to reaffiliate with a link to the website or the application for affiliation. But you only have to affiliate once every 3 years now going forward. In the meantime, in those intervening years, there's a membership, and you will receive an invoice, and we're going to send them out quarterly to programs, letting you know that it is time to renew your membership and what that cost happens to be, either $500 if you have one program or more if you have multiple programs. The first set of membership invoices is going out right now, and we will continue on a quarterly basis through the rest of the year.
Okay, so I think that sounds good, and we're just at almost 4 o'clock. So I want to thank Tim and Linda for the Ask NPSMA. And if we fly up to Grand Valley, you're going to cover our cost for the flight and hotel. You heard it here, folks.
So many good breweries in Grand Rapids. I will make sure you have an excellent time while you're here. Just wear your winter coat because it's cold.
Okay, well, I want to thank everyone for attending the Ask NPSMA session. The slides will be available, and have a great semester. Have a great Happy New Year to everyone, and have a wonderful decade as well, as we enter the new decade. So thank you for attending.
So long, everyone. Thank you.
All right, thank you. We'll stay in touch and keep you posted for the any questions that we may have later. Thank you.
Excellent. We're hoping to add some more international PSM programs. So I was very excited to get your email.
Yeah, thank you. I'll be mailing you later this afternoon for so we can get the links that Linda and you were mentioning, so we can start the process right away.
Okay, sounds good.
All right, thank you.
Okay, I think it's just the 3 of us.
Yeah, I think Deborah looks like she jumped
Yeah.
off.
I just wanted to let you all know that I went through and gathered everybody's information that was on the call, and it looks like we had 9 people that had pre-registered, and all but 1 attended, and then we had, let's see here, 2, 4, 6, 9 more that joined. So
Yeah.
it was a good turnout. I've got all their information. I'll try to get the emails and stuff. There's for the 8 of them that I didn't do during the call, but I'll email that around, and then I grabbed all the questions. So I'll send this around just so everyone has it.
Perfect.
You
Yeah,
know, one thing I forgot to mention, Jeannie, we should have encouraged them to come to next month's call.
Yep.
We're going to talk about the IDP. I completely forgot about it. So maybe you could just add that on your thank you note you send around.
I wasn't planning on sending a thank you note, so, but we can, if we need to, we can add that, or we could add it. I mean, we're going to send the PSM news out coming up,
Okay.
so.
That'll work. That'll work. Let's make sure that all these folks are on it, because people who are doing new programs may not be on our list yet.
And I thought with you as well that to get that information, and when it was wrapping up, I was trying to grab it and didn't grab it in time to put it in the chat. So next time.
I just completely forgot. My
Yep.
bad on that.
So
I thought
anyway.
this was great session, Tim.
Well, I was amazed when we had 17 participants that weren't the three of us or Deborah. I was like, okay, that's a good start.
But I think this really